Hi, welcome to Roots to Fruit. We're at our base of operations here at Oak Dean Nurseries up in our orchard, and I'm going to talk to you today about something called vegetative propagation. Now, this isn't sexual reproduction where you take seeds of a plant and you propagate a plant in that way. This is where you take a part of a plant and make a brand new one. Now, vegetative propagation, you can take pretty much any part of the plant and turn it into a brand new plant. Now, don't try and do that with humans. If you try to do that with your finger, say for example you've got a pair of secateurs, chopped your finger off, yeah, and then put it in some soil, you wouldn't get a new job, yeah. That's not going to happen. But with certain plants, at certain times of the year, you can do that. You can take part of a plant and turn it into a brand new plant, kind of like what they did with Dolly the sheep, but it is much, much easier. And what I'm going to do is going to introduce you to the easiest way of doing vegetative propagation, which is lifting and dividing herbaceous perennials. So a herbaceous perennial is something that has green or soft foliage, not woody foliage, it's got annual rings, but green soft foliage, and the root is over 3 years or 3 growing seasons old. That's what defines a perennial. And most of you like cottage garden plants, and a lot of your herbs you can do in that way. Annuals, anything that lives for just 1 year, you can't really do that way unless it's certain types of tender annuals that you're doing inside a greenhouse. But this is stuff that you can do outdoors. And the great thing about this is this is part of a maintenance task. So if you're starting your own garden maintenance round, or you're doing garden maintenance in your own garden, yeah, this is part of a routine task that you would do, because perennials, they spread out, they get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so what you've got to do is you've got to reduce them in size, otherwise a lot of them just take over the board and they'll start fighting with each other. And basically you want to keep them to a certain size. And very often what will happen is you'll take those, divide them and put them on the compost and chuck them away, or but what you can do with this one is, if you're a gardener, it's a way of making extra bit of money, putting some extra cheese in your nacho, or you could share it with your mates. You could have a plant swap, and so plants that you've dug up in your garden that your neighbour hasn't got or your friend hasn't got, you can swap, and you can build up a more diverse range of plants and interesting plants in your garden. So what I'm going to do is quickly show you basically how to do that, and give you a few tips that I've picked up over the years. We do this as a way of generating an income for the nursery, that it's plant sales, and obviously gardeners, you can do that, and we're doing this at the moment in the month of the very beginning of November. So you've kind of got a window through mid-October through to sort of into November when you can do that. I would say this is a late November that we have at the moment. A lot of the leaves are still on the trees, they haven't really changed colour yet. So it's more like probably October, sort of a couple of weeks ago. So very often I try not to go too much with the calendars, but I observe what is going on around me and what the state of the trees are. Winter doesn't happen just because it's the 1st of December or the 24th of December. Winter doesn't work that way. Winter works when in the gardening calendar, when the plants tell us it's winter, and when the last leaf has dropped on the floor, that is when winter is. So at this moment in time, you're looking roughly through the sort of coming towards the end of October into November. You can lift and divide perennials, and generally speaking, traditionally speaking, you will be lifting and dividing anything that has an early flower on, or spring, or flowers in spring or in early summer. These are the ones that you lift in November. Now, anything that then goes to the March time, so the end of February, beginning of March, when you lift and divide, those generally are perennials that would flower later, so through late summer or into early autumn. And the reason for that is, like nurseries look at that, is basically the potential earning that you have off the plant is that if you've got something that you've lifted and you've got it established in a pot over the winter, and you can do that outside, or if you really want to get it established, you can put it in a greenhouse, cold frame. You can get roots established in pots. You can then have a pretty saleable plant then from May next year. And that's how it works. So what we're going to do is do something really simple. Is we're going to have a go at mint. So I've got some mint here. It's pretty much dying back. And generally speaking, with perennials, what you're looking for is perennials that you cut back. The general rule of thumb is, if it's not green anymore, it's pretty safe to cut back. Some people with their perennials, they leave lots of foliage over the top. Over the winter, they leave it on, because when you get these frosts that come and it covers everything in white, it can look magical. But we don't get many of those types of frosts. And sometimes it can attract pests and diseases, so people will cut them down. Whereas some people think that if you're on an exposed site, if you leave that foliage on the top of there, it will protect the roots. So people won't cut back anything until the winter. But what you've got to bear in mind is that how that works is a little bit like when you're parking your car and it's frosty. If you're parked under some trees, you haven't got to be scraped very often. You haven't got to scrape your windscreen. Whereas if you're out in the open like this, the frost comes, it will be really penetrating. So leaving that foliage just so that little bit of extra insulation is great. For what we're doing here, we are digging up this plant. We're going to take back a lot of that foliage away. So the tools that you're going to need are 2 forks, a pair of secateurs I've got there, and also I've got a very old panel saw or carpenter saw. It's pretty blunt, and I never throw these away because this is going to be my top tip. You're going to be told in the RHS manuals and gardening things traditionally that you're going to be using forks, and that's the best way to do it. It is a good way of doing it, but I'm going to give you another tip that works with using a saw, and I'll show you that when we actually divide the plant. The first thing that we're interested in now is how we're going to get the plant out. Now our stock beds, we use these pallet collars or wooden raised beds, and what we do is we fill them up with compost, and we put them straight over the top of the weed membrane, because what that does is it restricts the roots from going down. So you haven't got to dig down to get the roots out. So it's almost like it's potentially already fairly containerized, because the big thing is if you want to sell the plant is you want to get the roots coming out the bottom of the container. And if they've bottomed out on the bottom of that pallet collar, then it's done half the job for us. And the roots hitting that membrane encourages more fibrous roots. And more fibrous roots, what you're interested in as a gardener, whenever you go and buy a plant, or as a nurseryman or woman, or as a garden centre owner, is very often you're not interested in what's going on the top, you're only interested in what's going on in the roots inside the pot. If those roots are really, really healthy, that's often more important than what's going on the top. And that's how we've set up our propagation beds to shape and create more potential fibrous roots. So the one we're going to work on here is mint, and we're going to dig this out really carefully. And what it is, it's a matter of working your way carefully around the outside edge with the fork, teasing it out a bit at a time. And there we go, we've got ourselves up a really, really nice clump there. The important thing, even on a day like today when it's wet, if you've dug up a plant and you might think, well, it's pretty cool today, what's the problem? There's no direct sunlight coming out, the temperatures are low. But that wind, you can hear there, it's come up for us just as I've said it. What it's going to do is it's going to burn the root hairs off the edge of these roots, these fibrous roots. Those root hairs are straws that suck in the water. And what it means is now that I'm putting that wind has hit those roots there, that part there, all of those roots are getting damaged, and that reduces its function for taking in water. So the first thing that I'm going to do with the clump that I've dug up is I'm going to place it straight into the pot over here, and that protects the roots. You can cover it over with a bit of plastic, you can put water in there if you want to, but the main thing is just get it out of the wind just to protect those roots. And what I'm going to say as well is you'll notice that there's a big patch that's there now that's within the compost, and what it is remember, we want a clump for next year. So what I'm going to do before we even go back and start potting these up, getting them ready, what I'm going to do, and this is how simple division is. I've taken up 3 clumps, because that's all that this was. This time last year it was just 3 clumps. Taken 3 clumps up, and that's a very, very simple form of division. And if you've got a plant in your border and you want to make it spread further, this kind of dividing is very simple. It goes straight from dividing up to there and putting it over to there. So I've got these 3 clumps. Take off weeds, we don't want the weeds in there. Make sure it's all looking pretty healthy stuff. Yeah, that's all mint. And what I'm going to quickly do with this now is I'm going to cut back, take away any stress, which could be through taking water away from the roots, which is having lots and lots of foliage it's got to keep. I've taken that stress away from the plant and kind of put it into a form of dormancy, and I'll just replant these, spread them out a little bit again, then hopefully this time next year we'll be back here again and doing the same thing and being able to get some plants that we can either share, give to your friends or to your neighbours, or if you want to create a business out of this, sell them on to other people. So that's the first part of the task, which is lifting and dividing. So the key is think about the time of the year. Is it coming up towards November, beginning of November, late October, or is it coming towards the end of February, beginning of March? What's the weather telling you? If it's a frosty, cold, snowy day, we don't want to be doing it. But like today, it's fairly mild. It's been pretty wet as well. It's great to lift it up. If you're doing plants this time of year, you're looking for stuff that's an early flowerer if you want to take advantage of a selling point, but you can do most perennials anyway, but this time of year or late February, beginning of March. Think about if you want to do this professionally, if you've dug up a plant in someone's garden that's got really big and overgrown and you're dividing it up and you're taking it away, you can make your own propagation beds on an allotment or in your own back garden, plant them out or pot them up and then grow them on for next year. And that's a great way because you charge your customer for lifting and taking away the rubbish, but you then turn that rubbish into money. Yeah, so that's an important part about this task. It's showing a way of making a little bit of extra money on what you've gone into the customer's garden, you've maintained it, you've charged them for doing that, you've charged them for getting rid of the rubbish. What are you going to do with that rubbish? This is a great sustainable way, not just economically and financially for your own business, but also it's good for the environment as well. It's not going to landfill, it's not going to compost, you're pretty much recycling it on your own site and reducing that carbon footprint. So those are the things. And also when you come to dig it up carefully. Make sure you get as much root as possible, and then you'll notice that I picked some off that had a shoot and a root, trimmed them down so that it didn't put lots of stress on the root for getting out moisture, and replanted 3 for next year, and then I put the other one straight into a pot whereby the roots are protected from this wind so don't damage those root hairs and the plant can remain healthy and viable. The end.